Welcome to the American Med Spa Association podcast, Medical Spa Insider. This week, AmSpa founder Alex Thiersch is speaking with co-founders of Portrait, Dr. Patrick Blake, Chief Medical Officer, and Praveen Ramineni, CEO. Also, Sam Pondrom, JD of ByrdAdatto.
All right, everybody, welcome. This is Alex Thiersch, and welcome to the Medical Spa Insider. I keep saying this, and damn it, we're going to do it one of these days. We got to get a better name than Medical Spa Insider. That just sounds too much like an 80s talk show. But we're very, very lucky to have on the AmSpa hotline three incredible guests. And I think this is going to be a really cool, really innovative, and I think educational for those of you who are listening podcast. Number one, we have the one and only Sam Pondrom, JD from ByrdAdatto. Many of you know him for his golden voice. He is the man with the brains behind most of the ByrdAdatto legal summaries and everything that they do. He's with us. And then we're very lucky to have from a company that some of you may not have heard of, but some of you may have, called Portrait, which we have the CEO and founder, Dr. Patrick Blake, who's also the chief medical officer. Sorry about that. CEO and co-founder is Praveen Ramineni. Sorry, I knew I was going to screw that up. But Portrait is a really, really interesting, innovative. I hate to use the word disruptive because it sounds so techie, and I'm just not like that. But it's kind of a disruptive new way for folks who want to get into aesthetics to get into aesthetics. And it's a cool platform that I want them to talk about. We're going to also talk about rules and regulations, medical directors, kind of navigating this whole world of compliance, which is becoming increasingly difficult. And I think it's a really unique platform that these guys have created. So first, what I'd love to do is Praveen, let's start with you and Dr. Blake, both of you together. Praveen first, just, give a little, thumbnail sketch of your background and then how you both got going and started Portrait and what you're seeking to provide as part of this platform.
Sure. I think, I could certainly talk about my background, my professional history, which was primarily management consulting, private equity, and then, tech. But I actually think what's most relevant is just the fact that I come from a family of medical providers. We have about 20 medical providers. Pick a specialty, you probably have it in the family. And I think that's actually kind of just seeing what it took for them to establish, their practices, I think is really where my intuition or instincts come from. And, the goal I think we've always had is well, how do you preserve the option of being an independent medical provider? How do you stay competitive in a world where that just seems to be an opportunity that I think a lot of older medical providers kind of grew up with, but it's just slowly being extinguished for a variety of different reasons. And I think that it was really important to me when starting this company that we had somebody who could really speak to that vantage point. And so having, a clinical provider Patrick as a co-founder was really important to me. And I think there was very few people who I came across who were both excellent in clinical care, really had a passion for, what it took to operate a successful practice, and an odd, almost strange interest in compliance, which, I think Patrick is really that trifecta. So very lucky that, we were able to partner on building this company together.
So Patrick, he's put you on the spot. You have a compliance is cool tattoo on your back.
I do.
I'm sure. What I would like to do is just take a quick step back, though, if you don't mind, because there's going to be some folks who are driving and don't necessarily know what Portrait is. And I've spent a lot of time looking at what you guys do. I know the setup, but if you could give a Reader's Digest version of kind of what your platform does and how it helps people, because it's a way for there's providers out there who are trying to get into aesthetics, who are in aesthetics, who want to start their own business. One thing that we always talk about whenever we give talks is that this is such a cool industry because it allows you to build your own brand, which is getting more and more difficult in healthcare. So talk about Portrait for a second. What you guys do is to set the context.
Sure. I think I kind of think about it as it's the easiest on-ramp to getting and launching kind of practice. And so, we've like iterated with like how we like introduce that value like into the market. But I think this like central idea of how do you go from this idea in your head to actually realizing it? There's a lot of things to like have to solve for. And so I think we're really just like lay it out pretty programmatically. And then really great, I think, an unfair advantage for somebody increasing. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to like start a practice to build a business, So how do you like give somebody kind of like the same advantage that maybe a very well established like practice around the corner, something that's been operating for many years, but like on day one, like how do you do that? Yeah, I think that idea really drove us into like how we've solved that with like process and technology, and also just like the amazing team that we've assembled. But Patrick, I think you can probably speak to that even better than I could.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. Historically, there are people who, and I would say we are definitely not this, but there are people who would refer to us as like a franchisor. We are absolutely not that. And the most clear reason why would be because, as you mentioned, Alex, people are really passionate about their brands. And we have found that which is not a huge shock, but when providers have that commitment to their brand, to their image, their reputation, which they inevitably do when launching their own business, that they have really great outcomes. And that, for me means the world. I think though, as Prav was saying, to maybe even be a little more tactical, all of those things that go into starting, a med spa where I'm sure you guys have seen, much more experience than we have, even on the sheer scale of mistakes people make, and sometimes, big mistakes, and really the costs that are incurred too. So even figuring out what do you need in your initial, launch kit, your emergency supplies and your policies and procedures, but also we built an electronic health record that we don't charge for, and it's designed from the ground up to serve aesthetics and to serve people who have, remote oversight and to, cover really the breadth of aesthetics. So, everything that we built marketing systems that we don't like charge for. We try to give as much value as we can to really be a one-stop shop, so that someone can launch or scale their business and really compete very well in a really competitive space. As long as they're dedicated, they can do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know, it's awesome. And so it is kind of a platform where if you want to open a business, you open your own brand, you can have all of those tools at your fingertips. I think, and the reason we're kind of here today, and by the way, I didn't mention, Dr. Blake, you're a board certified dermatologist. So we were joking about how we met at MSS, and back then, there's more so now, we didn't get quite as many dermatologists in our orbit as we do now. But as this business grows, what we've seen, I was just talking with someone today, the growth of the industry is it's so big and it's so wide, meaning we don't really even know where it starts and where it ends. But the reason that is that there's providers out there who want to come into the space because they're not generally happy with what they're doing in their, typical day-to-day practice, whether they're at the hospital, their general practice, their derms, plastics, whatever it is. They want to come in and they want to do something different for themselves. They want to have their own brand. They want to, control their own time. They want to obviously they want to make money, but they want to, really engage in patient care. And what that does is it brings a lot of folks into the industry who are not necessarily traditionally from aesthetics. And when it comes to medical directors, when it comes to providers who need to then both learn the treatments and at the same time learn how to set themselves up and set their protocols up in a way where they're compliant, most importantly, they're safe while still being profitable, that gets really challenging. And Sam, I want to ask you, and then I want to kind of open it up because I think this is what everyone wants to hear about, is when it comes to the compliance side of things, like setting protocols, and we have a whole 2-hour talk that we do on this sometimes, so I don't want you to get into that, but what do you see when folks are coming in and want to open an aesthetic practice? And let's say they're a medical provider, either a physician or a provider. What's the one thing that you think is the most kind of difficult to explain to them about med spas and the medical aesthetics? Because, and as an example, I've been given the same talk year in and year out about, medical spas, medical aesthetics. They are medical treatments, right? You can't it's not spa treatments. The spa in the word, I think, drives me crazy. What is it for you? And then I'd love to kind of pick the brains of the rest of you on kind of what you think the most challenging part of navigating this industry is.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately that sort of continuum of services that are practice of medicine that we have, I guess they've done a pretty good job overall as an industry of making them very much feel not like the practice of medicine. I think that is one of the bigger challenges when, especially if it's, from further down the license scale where they've always just been doers and they're not seeing all the other pieces that go into it. And all of a sudden they're like, I can do this. I want to jump into this. And you start talking about, okay, you can. There's, about 15 different boxes we have to tick before you start executing on services or treating patients or whatever we want to call it. But I think even on that continuum, when we've got, like IVs on one side all the way up to, injectables and radio frequency and whatnot on the other, I think even on that, just making sure that people understand the gravity of this. And right, yes, it's elective. Yes, it's largely about beauty for the most part. But that doesn't change that you're caring for patients and that that standard is there and that we have to maximize patient safety and we have to do all of the things we need to do to get sorted.
Yeah. And Praveen and Dr. Blake, I know you've got a bunch of providers who have signed up already. What typically are you dealing mostly with nurse practitioners, PAs, physicians? Who's been drawn to your platform so far?
Yeah, I mean, we started in like 2020. So you mentioned like the space has kind of like evolved, but I think in many ways like we kind of created that like movement around like at least in the modern sense of like what the breadth of a platform could look like. And so we've kind of just seen like the use case expand like over time in terms of like who initially was like seeking out this opportunity, which oftentimes is like a lot of mid-level providers, people who they knew that they were generating a lot of value, but they weren't necessarily like capturing that value for themselves, right? So that necessitated building out a medical director network to provide like the required oversight, which Patrick did a fantastic job of engineering both, programmatically, but also like building that into like the technology, which I think is something that like we continue to like iterate on, and I think is going to be like an important differentiator over time. But now there's also just non-physician providers who just they don't want to just provide oversight with collaborating providers. They actually just want to go into this business as well, for a variety of different reasons, or perhaps like they see why it's like advantageous for them to incorporate this into their practice for other reasons. Maybe they want diversification of their revenue, maybe it helps feed in surgical consults, like whatever it may be. So I think what's interesting about aesthetics is it's like it is like Sam, to your point, it is healthcare, but it's the consumerization of healthcare that like we're seeing, and the deeper penetration of like technology into like healthcare to build better experiences for providers and for patients. And in many ways, I kind of view like aesthetics as like the bleeding edge of that. And I think a lot of the trends that we see here, they may ultimately be adopted into more traditional like medical verticals, more payer-driven medical verticals. But the experiences, the expectation of like what a treating room even looks like, all that kind of stuff, I think is like very fascinating. So anyways, and then I think there are a lot of people that are very interested in the space, and also the aesthetics is, where's the line stop between aesthetics versus like functional health versus weight loss? It's all getting kind of blurred. as people realize that once you have, a patient in a practice, what other services, treatments, support are they looking for? How can you provide that? How do you get educated about what those are? Which I know has also been something that Patrick has done like a phenomenal job of just integrating that education into our platform and our technology.
Well, and Patrick, I would love to get your thought on that, because in this kind of context, because when I was looking at your, not just your platform, but other platforms that do what you guys do, it's my mind like wants to explode. The amount of different states you're dealing with, the different providers, it becomes very, very difficult to set consistent standards across that whole thing. Talk about some of the challenges of that, and how you go about navigating this in this world where you've got not only different states, vastly different laws, but you've got, under the roof, you've got so many different types of providers who can do different things.
Yeah, it certainly keeps us busy. I think, and this kind of ties in with the what we were talking about, kind of the difficult things about people with their launch too. So I think that it would be number one is, and I'm sure you encounter this, I've listened to a long-time listener too, that people will sometimes mimic what they've seen elsewhere, right? They have a friend who launched med spa. They have someone, in another state. They have someone who has different credentials, or they have someone who just, started and maybe hasn't had any major fallout, yet. But so I've seen that a lot where people say, because this person does this, I'm going to do this, which is, not a great approach. There is that feeling, which I think is always important across medicine and really anything in life, where you don't know what you don't know, and so if there's a big blind spot there, I have seen people come in with more confidence maybe than because they're confident as healthcare providers, right? They kind of naturally sometimes bring that confidence to the business and the legal side, and that is not a great situation for them. Right. And then the other thing is that I think sometimes getting people to not be, to not feel overwhelmed in the process, that there are a lot of, I think because of social media and because it is a competitive space, that folks come in and they feel like they need to do everything all at once. And I'm very much of the, let's solve our problems for today, and have a future plan in place. But when you are trying to suddenly launch with 8 different services and hiring people and building out a location and figuring out devices and all of that, I think it makes it very difficult to keep track of the key things that you have to hit. And so I'd say things that we do well is just, there are obviously a ton of differences on each state by state regulations, and also for providers. But I think conceptualizing that, kind of thinking, okay, number one, I'm always telling people, talk to your boards. I mean, some boards are more helpful than others for sure, but that's always a good thing. Getting on newsletters is always a good thing. Getting good counsel, knowledgeable counsel, because I'm sure also you've talked to attorneys who are not in this space at all, who I think are well-intentioned, but sometimes lead people down the wrong path. And really just making that, it's probably joking to have this passion about the compliance, right? I mean, I guess that's true. And part of it is that I think if you approach it with that a degree of curiosity, it can be a little bit interesting, and that you're going to feel good and feel confident when you go home every day. Because if anyone knows someone who's been through even an investigation that where nothing actionable was found, where it's a long investigation, the damage that does to your psyche. And the same thing in aesthetics, where, and I'll have this conversation sometimes with people more on the sales side of aesthetics, where they'll say, it's 99% of people do well or whatever. And I'm like, fortunately in aesthetics, 99% is really not good enough. You need kind of like 99.9 something, because even if you have a bad situation once every, 7 years, it takes the fun out of it. So you want to be able to make it's a fun field, or delightfully fun field. And I think we just try to give people the framework. Here are the things you should think about. Here are the people you should talk to. Here are some playbooks that, these are the known check boxes on a given state. And we do try to give guidance on, hey, make sure these filings are done and things like that, because there are, as you noted, a lot of state by state differences. We cover a lot of ground, not just in compliance, but everything in our company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and Sam, we do boot camps together and talk about this stuff. The multi-state brands are, I'm always amazed, because to me, just thinking about it, like literally it makes my head want to explode, because there's so much difference. I'm curious, kind of taking a step back, with so many differences across the states, are there certain things for folks who are trying to think about getting into this that are kind of consistent? Are there some maxims that folks should know that really cross state lines? Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is medical treatment, right? Which sounds obvious maybe to us, but to some it's not. And I think it's because of how the business has developed and all the things that you all said before. Are there some things that we can just kind of hang our hat on and rely upon that cross state lines that make it a little bit easier?
I mean, definitely. So making sure, number one, who is kind of making that final medical determination. In some states in some situations that's autonomous nurse practitioner, and in other states it's a physician. In some states it's PAs now, where there's independence too. So I think it's really keeping that in mind, that any decisions that are eventually going to happen, there needs to be an ongoing dialogue. There needs to be ongoing collaboration. I think anytime things are developed in a vacuum or individually, that's a problem. And so I've seen that a lot with someone deciding something. I had this today, actually, someone saying they wanted to do a specific procedure. And I just asked them, like, what is your, kind of protocol design? What do you have written out for that? And it was like, well, I don't have anything. But I'm excited to offer this. Well, respectfully don't. Just wait until you get that, till you have everything together. So I think having systems in place, making sure that you have, the appropriate contracts like signed, drawn up, and that you have the collaboration agreements, and that really that people are doing things that they have the appropriate, I'd say across the guidance from the medical boards. I think it's sometimes vague or incomplete from all the boards, most of them, but some of those things around making sure someone does have, kind of like, just if they were to take a quick look at it, that they have the requisite training, experience, knowledge to do this, that you have an appropriate escalation pathway, that you have a standard review process, that you have quality improvement metrics, that your staff is well trained, that you do the basic stuff, HIPAA, BLS, bloodborne pathogens that are just, everywhere in healthcare, and that you really are thoughtful in the patients too, that you are really thinking first about what am I going to be comfortable with from an outcome, and where am I kind of reaching, and if I am reaching and maybe doing something that I don't feel incredibly confident doing, seeking out more training. There's a lot out there. So I just think being very methodical, not rushing things, and really getting mentors too. I mean, my goodness, like that speaks volumes. And I've seen that where, with providers and entrepreneurs, non-clinician entrepreneurs as well, that hearing what other people wish they would have done differently, I mean, that really is helpful. Well,
yeah. Sam, a lot of what Dr. Blake said, I think kind of resonates with our talk that we give. And I'm curious, what are some of the biggest, first of all, I'd love your thoughts on what was just said. And then also, what are some of the biggest kind of most common mistakes that you see when people are trying to open and don't necessarily know the rules? But I think that overconfidence that we just mentioned, I think is real. I think they can just do it and they don't necessarily know exactly what it is, but there's so much that goes into it. What are some of the things that you see off the bat that kind of give you the most headaches?
Yeah. And I find it interesting, Dr. Blake, what you were talking about. I think a lot of people get stuck on gray areas or unclear areas which are important and we got to spend some appropriate time on, but there's so many things that are consistent from state to state. And, you really just go back to your clinical training. And there's a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say, "Hey, Sam, what do I need to do here? What does it look like, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh, that's a clinical question. That's you." And then they think about it and they're like, "Oh, yeah." And so I think sometimes people lose the forest for the trees a bit. And it's helpful when they step back and say, "Okay, as a clinician, what would I do here? What's correct? What do protocols look like? What does escalation look like?" And Dr. Blake, to your point, there's the number of times where I, kind of walking people through, and especially with medical directors, like, "Hey, I points for medical directors or, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I get to the quality control, quality improvement plan. And they just are like, "I don't know what that is. What's that?" And I think to your point, that's where I sometimes are like, "Okay, let's pause." And Alex, to your question, I think what I see with a lot of people is a wise man once said, Jeff Siegel once said, timelines are artificial and arbitrary. And, that's for the most part true. And I think a lot of times people will get in their head, I've got to be up and running by whatever date or time or whatever. And so they'll start, kind of speeding full, running full speed ahead, and they won't take the time to make sure that their base is set, that the proper foundation is built. And, in a previous life, I used to work in construction. I did accounting for construction. And one of the big things in construction was always rework, right? Like if you did something wrong, you had to fix it. And the biggest question was, if you didn't have time to do it right the first time, why would you have time to do it again? And I always think that's really instructive. I'm like, if you are so set on opening that quickly, if you do something wrong, it's going to be detrimental, if not fatal, to whatever you're trying to do. So why not take a deep breath, reassess that timeline, and see if it even actually is, valid. And then let's make sure that we're going through all the paces and that whoever I'm helping is ticked all the boxes they need to tick.
I'm curious for kind of all of your perspectives on this, because this is an industry where we have obviously trained providers, physicians in particular, who come from other verticals, that whether it's family practice, emergency room doctors, whatever it is, a ton of them are coming into aesthetics. They're kind of relearning aesthetics. But then there is this, for whatever reason, there's a segment of the industry that's just kind of like, they feel like, well, this is aesthetics. I can come in, I can just start doing it, or I'm a medical director, I can lend out my license to whoever I want. It's no big deal. It's kind of become this area where there's a lot of, not intentionally, but there is a lot of missteps because people aren't qualified to do what they are doing or should be doing. And to your point just a second ago, Dr. Blake, you mentioned, someone say, "I want to add this treatment." It's like, well, okay, but if you're going to add a treatment, do you know how to do it? Does the medical director know how to do it? What are the protocols? All of those things. And a lot of those get skipped. And it's one of the things that I've been impressed by what y'all have been doing, because it's easy to open up there. And there's some of them that have done this. You open up a platform and say, "Hey, we're going to handle all your stuff so you can open a business." It's easy to do that. It's not easy to necessarily do it safely and compliantly. And so I'm just curious, like how how do you address that? I'm sure you've gotten some people that have tried to come to your platform that you just must be like, it's just probably not a good fit, or you need more training, or you need to learn more. You need to, you need more oversight. It's gotta be complex, rewarding on the one hand, but also kind of stressful. What do you, take your turns, but I'm curious what you think about it.
Totally. Yeah, I'll start with it. I mean, so I guess for one thing, I will tell people, so I still serve as a medical director for several providers within Portrait. So I think it helps keep me grounded in reality and thinking about, hey, if there's a patient who has that we just had a patient who had some body dysmorphia, had some issues that I was seeing 2 days ago, and just trying to help out to be comfortable and confident addressing those situations when you do have problem patients. I'd say like usually, I mean, the only time, usually if we talk to people, even if they have some maybe misconceptions or whatnot starting, it's really gone pretty well. And I part of it may just be that because as part of the launch process in particular, that we're giving them, here is the standardized thing. And especially now that we've done it a lot of times, there's a pretty high degree of trust there. So I don't really encounter it as much anymore. When we were first getting going, there were, and I guess this is one that, old habits die hard, right? And so I'm sure, and y'all have encountered them too, people who've been in places that were not particularly well run. And I guess they've really just been, not well run in the sense of, they've been way out of bounds with like major compliance issues. I think if you look hard enough at almost any business, you're going to find some gaps. Certainly every single one I've looked at, I found some gaps, but big compliance issues. And so getting them to rethink things and say, hey, I love that analogy, Sam, too, on the house, hey, you were in that non-earthquake proof house, like, non-hurricane ready. And like, this time we're building a new house. So let's build it with that foundation. And so sometimes getting people to reorient around, what do you want to do for your long-term future? This is, business you're trying to really, build for the long run. So just kind of getting that mindset there. But I think now, just because we've done it a lot, that usually there's pretty quick buy-in, to be honest.
That's awesome. And that's encouraging, to be honest.
It is, yeah.
We've not as much anymore, but I mean, I've been, at this since 2008, and there's often people who are still to this day don't kind of understand that, yes, this is medical treatment. Yes, there are things that have to be done. Yes, there's protocols. Yes, side effects, bad outcomes happen. All that said, Praveen, I'm always interested in the, there's, investors and investment coming into this industry, and there's so much opportunity, and you've got this amazing platform. I'm curious, what's your biggest, two things. What gets you most excited about this industry and where we're going? Because you mentioned it yourself. This is kind of the new way to practice healthcare, right? It's different. It's not the same old kind of stodgy clinical environment that we're used to. What gets you most excited about this industry? And then what, if anything, keeps you up at night that makes you kind of worried about, oh man, this is something that I gotta be careful about?
I just want to interrupt. We may go for an hour here. Probably got some excitement, so get ready.
No. I mean, I'll try to keep it up. It's kind of what I talked about or mentioned earlier. I do think that there are certain lessons that are being learned in aesthetics, kind of like being that the consumerization of healthcare. You're not dealing with payers. Things can evolve pretty quickly. There's much more like entrepreneurial spirit in this medical vertical. And so what lessons are being learned here that might have like implications for the future, So I think about that a lot, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur in medicine when, most, I guess I'll talk about physicians for a second now. A lot of my physicians, like some of the best med schools, best residency programs, they're not thinking about launching a practice anymore. That's very different than my, parents or uncles or aunts who went into the industry. And so what does it mean for that opportunity to be slowly extinguished by the creep of large healthcare systems or private equity or whatever it is? So I think there are lessons to be learned in what's going on in aesthetics. And the reality is, even with like a lot of the capital that's been allocated to this space, it's still a very fragmented market. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that that's not a bad thing. I think that's actually like a good thing when you can have providers who are able to deliver care, build a relationship, with a patient that is more on like their terms, but they're ultimately, supported by like the infrastructure that allows them to like maintain like that sense of like independence. So I guess in that sense, I think it's like quite interesting.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to kind of go back to like an earlier point you were talking about compliance. I think one of the challenges in healthcare, it's I think for like a lot of tech entrepreneurs, like jumping into it, they don't realize that it's like launching into like 50 different countries, when they think about like, oh, I'm going to launch this platform. And then they're like, oh, I'm launching into actually like 50 different, frameworks that might have some overlap, but I also just can't be like lulled away by that because there might be like one very specific difference between two that otherwise seems similar. And then that's going to cause a problem. Right. And there's also like a lot of norm setting that like my friend did it this way, so I'm going to do it that way. And it's really hard as like a provider or business operator to understand like what your exposure is. If that's like your pathway for informing yourself, it's hard to like appreciate it or like the consequence of it. When you're excited and you want to get up and running as quickly as you can, when in reality, if you just walk through that path just a bit further, you realize that there's just a few things that you could do to remove that exposure, which can be like pretty traumatic, adversely traumatic to your business.
I feel like, and Dr. Blake, I know you got some stories you want to tell. But one thing I want to follow up on, Praveen, is I don't know if this is true. I've had a feeling that there's been a lot of investment. There's been private equity. There's been tech that's coming in. I kind of agree with you. I feel like maybe there hasn't been that realization of just how difficult it is to scale across states. I feel like, and I don't know, and I think you would know better than me. And so please tell me what you think. Has it been more of a challenge for kind of that industry that wants to come in and build apps, build in technology platforms? All of a sudden you get into, all of a sudden you got Sam telling you all these different things and you've got all these regulations you're following. Has it been more difficult, and has that kind of caused it to grow a little bit less quickly on the scale that we kind of imagined it would, which is why it's still very fragmented and why it's still very kind of mom and pop? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think there has been some realization around that. I think if you're looking at it purely from a financial standpoint, and I want to be like mindful of like the audience for this conversation, but a lot of, if you're a business operator, you're probably hearing pitches around like private equity,
all the time.
And like somebody sold their practice for like a certain multiple. There's a certain amount of like financial engineering. If you can accumulate a certain amount of revenue, EBITDA, like profit, the bigger that gets, the higher the multiple that you get traditionally. So a lot of financial engineering is just like trying to trade up on that multiple. But aggregating that and then actually like maintaining it and then understanding like the role of like the local provider and the relationship between the, that revenue to that practice or that provider is where I think a lot of people have I'd say like learned a lot of lessons, it's relative to like maybe a lesson how they would have viewed like rolling up like orthopedics practices or something like that.
Right.
So it's one, medical roles are challenging, period.
Yeah.
Aesthetics is like an additional, I think, headwind that a lot of people didn't fully appreciate. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to continue trying. And, I'm sure that some people like will figure it out and will generate like the, the right outcomes. But I think a lot of people have struggled with that. I really view that what we're doing is like, at the end of the day, we're not trying to financially engineer something. We're not trying to do like a roll up, but we're trying to create like a true efficiency, like into the marketplace, not like a financial like efficiency. That efficiency is built on, do you get to spend more time on the things that you want, and can you afford to stay like independent? And I think in that regard, we really have had a pretty dramatic effect on this overall industry. I think there's, whether people choose to join Portrait's platform or not, I think we have really made it aware to, like available to them as an option, and that has like influenced how people view like their role within a practice, and just what they want to do for the future.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Blake, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I just want to touch on, because Prav dodged the one on what keeps you up at night. I
Oh,
think
right.
for,
Yeah.
I think for I'm gonna say what I'm gonna guess, and I just because we have these conversations so often. Like we probably have 1,000+ things on our goals right now, I would say, and so it's like there is just so much complexity to launching a successful business. And we are very much over time, we become increasing more technology first as a company. And the reason really is that's the only way to do things efficiently enough that we can provide the value we provide at scale. And it's really building this enduring product that I think is going to position, our customers well for forever. But the scope of what each individual business wants, because we work with people who are primarily telehealth, who do primarily weight loss, who do a lot of energy work, who have employees, who, are all, like, as you said, all these different levels of training, so trying to build something that really categorically serves all of these different customers. I think, we go hard every day, and I think even at night, because we both talk about it, your mind is still going, like, what do we need to do, tomorrow or next week? So I think having that sense of, we're not satisfied, we're happy with what we've done, but there's a lot we can do to continue to push things forward, is really always on our mind. It's beyond that, I think there's a lot to be excited about. There's always so many new products. There's still so much untapped, so many untapped patients out there. People who have interest, but we haven't really engaged them the right way. Different ways of combination modalities. Like, it's just a thrilling feel. And obviously, I'm biased because as a dermatologist, but I offer that to providers all the time. Like, if you want to switch roles for a day, I'm in, let's do this, because it's, aesthetics it's done right. It's incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah. And Sam, you have a kind of a different perspective as an attorney who helps out these practices. What's kind of the biggest risk you think some of these, as new practices start up? What keeps you up at night when it comes to the industry as a whole?
I think what keeps me up at night is that you can give people all the guidance in the world, but you can't make them execute on it. And that, to me, is one of the biggest things, where I can spend a lot of time with people and we can get them structured correctly, and we can, make sure they understand patient flow and supervision, delegation, all these things, and we're ticking all these boxes. And when we do all that, we still can't ensure that they're going to go and actually do the things that we've asked them to do and that we've taught them to do. And that, to me, it's just the human element to it is the thing that keeps me up at night. And unfortunately, there's not a good fix for it. I think the other thing too tends to be just the continued enthusiasm for compliance. I think a lot of times, we'll get with people and we have interactions and we will get them on the right path, and we'll have these conversations about, hey, look, compliance isn't a tick box. Like, it is an ongoing process. You've got to keep on top of it. And they're very excited about it. They're doing good. And then if it's not somebody that we have, continuing touch points with, that also concerns me, where I'm like, okay, are they still doing this? Have they made it a part of their practice? Is it as important to them when we're not standing right there by their side?
I think that's a really good point. It's like, because the growth, like if you think about an industry, like the growth in size of an industry is going to attract regulators, right? Because it's just like, well, if I have a finite amount of resources, where can I deploy them, where I can actually support where am I going to get an ROI from my state regulatory dollar, federal regulatory dollar? So if aesthetics is growing really fast, it's becoming a very big market, it's going to attract attention. And so what was a historical norm may not be like the future norm, which is like goes back to the my friend did it this way. Well, why can't I do it that way? Kind of a thing. And so I think like that's like very like spot on when you say that. It really resonates with me. And but I do think that there is like a way to like get better like programmatically evaluating like the exposure of somebody. What state are you in? Do you focus maybe like start with like the service? When was the last time that you actually like updated your policies and procedures? I think there is way for like technology to like really like assist in this process and give you a sense of like what your exposure is. And then ultimately, you're running a business. So are you going to spend like 90% of your time on compliance? Patrick might, but like, but provider, they got to run their business. They got to run their business at some point, right? They got to do something. So it's a trade-off, like everything, starting operating your own business is a trade-off with finite resources. So that resonates.
Yeah. Patrick, I'd love your thoughts on that too, because it looks like you were about to say something.
No, I mean, I think again, it's spot on. It's just and it's one of these. One thing that I use this is one tagline I've used, which maybe is, I don't know if it's obnoxious, but like maybe it is. But I've had that with clinicians who have been doing things a certain way, and which I think what strikes a nerve for a clinician if you tell them, so you've been doing this for 15 years, and they're like, yeah, and I'm like, or so are you practicing the same way you were practicing 15 years ago? And that, are you using the same products? Are you doing the same things? And it's like, oh my God, no, I would never. How could I not evolve? I mean, I'd be terrible. And you're just like, you kind of let that sink in, that, yeah, I mean, probably everything needs to be looked at from time to time. And I think having that as, so we have guidance that we give to providers or suggestions, on system, like what, you need at least an annual review process. If you're bringing a new service on, this is what you should do. If you've got people who had a negative outcome, you need to like spend the time and look at what could you have done better there. And just to have that, like a little bit of healthy self-doubt, to not be satisfied with where your either skills are at or your business is at. And to just not become complacent. Going to meetings is great, listening to things. There's so much great content out there. A lot of great people you can learn from, and just making that sort of part of your identity. But yeah, I'm pretty quick to kind of jump on folks when they're like, when you get this is what I've always done. I never think that's a great response to really anything.
Yeah, it's not. Nor is it, well, all my friends do it this way, therefore I should do it this way.
Yeah,
and that's where we always love that, because that's we get that all the time. We're kind of bumping up against time. I do want to know, like, what, like, for Praveen and Dr. Blake, Sam, I know what your goals are, but like, what's your like, guys, what's the ultimate vision for Portrait? Is it, like, going to expand to Mars at some point and interstellar domination, or what are you thinking? Like, because it's is this the way that practices are going to operate now from here going forward? I mean, we're seeing so much of it with GLP-1s and all the, all telehealth. I mean, you can buy, GLP-1s off of pharmaceutical websites right now, which is kind of frightening. But what are you guys trying to do? What does the end look like for both of you?
I think, well, I'll speak for myself, but hopefully we're aligned on this mission, Patrick, because that would be better. We're powering independent medical practices. Like, I think that, and really underscoring the word like independent. I think that's what we're building towards. And, like so many of the themes that like we touched on today, like Sam, like imagine, doing a legal review with somebody where like you're supported by a technology product experience, which is kind of already running like not a comprehensive, but a reasonable like audit of like where they are. Are you missing basic documentation? You've added a new service. How do you review that if you require oversight, with your medical director? What state are you operating? What's your licensure? Like there are business rules that can be applied here, and we're also like entering like a new era where it's easier to compile this information. And then what does it look like to have a legal review, with your attorney, ByrdAdatto, at that point? It probably informs you and also makes it much more efficient to like have that dialogue. I think that's super valuable. If somebody is like operating on a portrait-like platform, it doesn't mean that investments can't still happen, but how much easier is it to like underwrite that specific practice when you don't have to chase down a bunch of like books that don't really exist or weren't properly kept, right? Which is like the struggle with trying to deploy capital like into this space. So I actually think that there's a way to keep practices independent, but also thriving. And in many ways, it's easier for technology to penetrate at this level than it is some of the bigger roll-ups or systems, because there's so many layers for technology. That's why technology is so difficult to penetrate healthcare when you go through all the decision makers there. So I think that's a massive opportunity, and it's one that we're very passionate about pursuing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's also where, this market lives right now. It still is independent practices. Like I think it's different than a lot of others. Dr. Blake, are you looking to be?
Yeah, we're thankfully we're
world
on the
domination.
same page. Yeah, no, really towards empowering small businesses. And again, like that's for me. It also I see the incredible value in people having great patient provider relationships, and everything that we do that gives them the time and the money to really invest in those relationships. I think it puts the entire specialty in a great space, that patients that are going to have great outcomes, I think we'll be able to hopefully manage most of the direction of the field internally rather than have it managed by, a regulator. I think that, and they're going to do really well, financially. They're going to be able to control their own hours and schedules, and when they want to take time with their kids, and take time away, and what services they want to offer. So all of that that really puts people in a position, and really in the driver's seat for their career, which is, as we've talked about, becoming increasingly more challenging in most of medicine. It just, like, I'm really proud of that, and that's my hope, for the years to come for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's inspiring. I hope, and I mean that genuinely, because you see so much of the things that go on, and there is so much activity and promise and investment, and there's money to be made, but at the end of the day, it's, you really are, you're impacting people's lives and in many, many ways. So it's cool. And I hope that's how it turns out. And I think, the consumerization of healthcare, as we talked about, is running into, money, right? And wealth and building of all these things. And it makes it really kind of creates almost a conflict that we all, as an industry, are going to have to navigate. And to your point, I think if we don't do it, someone's going to do it for us, and it's not going to be exactly what we're looking for. Sam, I want to give you just a quick last word on, thoughts, dreams, goals.
That's awesome. It's nice to hear other people thinking about this. I think a lot of times, I get needled being a lawyer, to your point, you go and you tell somebody what they need, and they're like, why would I listen to you? They're like, well, literally what I do. But it's an interesting space to be in because of the heavy regulation and the way people are trying to pull it out of that, regulatory structure. And it's just not something you can do. I mean, you can make it feel unlike healthcare as much as possible, but it's always going to be healthcare. And it's nice to have non-legal partners stepping in and saying, hey, look, we can help with that. We can make this easier. We can use technology to flatten this curve.
Yeah. Back when
I think that, platforms like what we're starting with Portrait and, other people that are starting to get into the space. I think that conversation is happening sooner, and like people are understanding like the value of that. And my hope is that by the time they're like talking to you, they're like primed to like want to pay attention to that information because they understand the value of it, And so I actually think there's a pretty interesting like symbiotic relationship that can be built between product and technology and the professionals that support and service this industry. And so I'm excited about some of the work that we're doing together.
Great.
Yeah, for sure. We hear nowadays when we talk to folks, there's a lot better chance that they are going to have heard of some of the terminology than 5, 6, 7 years ago when it was like we were speaking a completely different language. But I think that's really cool. So again, congrats on everything. I would love to know from either one of you, if folks want to learn more about Portrait, where can they go to find out more information? There's probably somebody driving their car right now is like, I want to open my own practice. How do I do that? But where can they find out more?
So Patrick's personal cell phone number is
Let's do that. Let's start with that.
It is everywhere. So yeah.
Honestly, just go to portraitcare.com. If you there's plenty of ways to get in touch with us off of that. And we have a very passionate, dedicated team that's like ready to address your questions, regardless of whether or not you're ready to start your practice. I think you always start the conversation, even as you're like your ID. And I think if we're able to create that level of awareness and education about how to be successful in this industry, then that's awesome.
Well, congratulations, guys, and Dr. Blake. I'll give you the kind of the last final word. But it's been cool to see what you guys have done. I think it's important, and so congrats on that. And then final thoughts, and we'll sign off.
In all seriousness, you are welcome also to message me on Instagram. It's Patrick_Blake_MD or Portrait Providers, and we'll get back to you. I just think I feel so funny taking your lot, but the community over competition, and we really do have so much to learn from each other. And I think despite there being a lot of challenges in this space, the reality is it's growing fast. There's better and better treatments out there, and I think if people put the right time in and really build their foundation the right way, it's an incredible business opportunity as well.
That's awesome. All right. Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. This was a cool conversation. We'll have to continue it again some other day, and best of luck. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for watching the Medical Spa Insider podcast. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel for future videos and podcasts. For more information about the American Med Spa Association, please check our description below.